Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now I wouldn't recommend either this i5 or this graphics card that we're using in today's one, but I have these two parts and I thought we'd compare them just to see how well they can play games in 2026. Again, wouldn't recommend these two necessarily, but before I sold them off I thought let's give them a chance, see if we can actually play anything and if so, how well. So the i5 4690 here, 4 cores, 4 threads. You can pick this up for like £6 at CEX here in the UK. The GTX 960 here is the 2GB version. Unfortunately, the 4GB card would have really helped us out today, but the 2GB one is still a bit cheaper, but probably not worth the price saving for half of the VRAM amount, because 4GB will certainly help you out in a lot of newer titles. But let's see what this super cheap combo can do. I was expecting absolutely nothing going into this, and because I wasn't expecting much, hopefully we shall all be pleasantly surprised. But let's take a look. I've also paired this combination with 16GB of DDR3 clocked at 1866 MHz. It seems that here in the UK DDR3 is still pretty well priced, at least at this point in time, but perhaps that will change too. But let's get into it and see how this combo performs. Alright, so we'll start with Apex Legends here. Now this is going to depend on the game and the map, of course, but with the lowest settings and the very low texture streaming budget here, along with TSAA, we're seeing 81 FPS overall. This is across 3 games, so this is an average taken from 3 different games. The 1% low was 53, and the 0.1% low was 36, so pretty consistent overall. We can see the CPU pegged at like 95 to 100% usage most of the time, but then again, so is the GPU. So this combination is actually a pretty good pairing, and to be honest there weren't that many dips and drops here. It wasn't too bad at all. Now I really wasn't expecting much from Arc Raiders here. There are certainly a few texture issues to be seen. I think this is in part because of the graphics card VRAM limitation, of course, plus it doesn't help that we are pegged at 100% utilization for the CPU. So this combination is certainly going to struggle in some areas, but despite this we were getting at least 30 FPS as an average, with some pretty hefty dips and drops here and there, I should add. As you can see, the 1% low was 8 and the 0.1% low was 5. There are also a few textures missing here and a few floating rocks and bits of concrete, as you can probably pick up on this video, but that's to be expected with a 2GB graphics card, and as I said at the start, I wasn't expecting anything, so to see at least 30 FPS, well, I am pleasantly surprised, even if the visual and gameplay experience isn't all that great. But then again, this is a pretty new game, and a combination like this is certainly better suited to those older and less intensive titles, that's for sure. You could probably also benefit from a frame rate cap in a lot of today's tested titles using something like Riva Tuner. You may want to go in and cap your games to 30 FPS because it will make any dips and drops feel a lot less significant, so bear that in mind too. I'll keep it very brief with Battlefield 6 because my other footage got corrupted unfortunately, but we're looking at least 30 FPS with FSR performance mode in the lowest settings. It will depend on the motherboard because you need secure boot, which the Z97 board I'm using supports, but this may not even run on lower end boards. Now you won't experience many problems in Counter-Strike 2. The only significant dips I saw with performance was when I got wiped out by enemy players. There was like a brief spike in the frame time graph, and you can probably pick that up on screen. If you're a better player than me, which is not difficult, I say this every time, then you probably are going to experience less frame dips with a combination like this. The CPU pretty much maxed out here, the 4 cores and 4 threads pretty much pegged at 100% utilization here. The CPU is doing its best and the GPU has a little more to give in this instance, but we're still getting at least 60 frames per second overall, easily in fact, but as expected it won't be consistent 100% of the time. We have Cyberpunk 2077 up next. This gives us a few options in terms of upscaling. We have XeSS FSR 2.1 or FSR 3. I'm using FSR 3 balanced because it looks better. We are of course locked out from any DLSS options because the graphics card is too old. As you can see, both the i5 and GTX 960 are pretty much maxed out here, which indicates that we have a decent pairing on our hands, but it's not one that's going to give you a particularly consistent gameplay experience in Cyberpunk. But I think we knew this. I said this at the start. I am however, surprised to see that we are getting this level of performance. I said that I wasn't expecting anything really, so to get at least 30 FPS, it's okay. The crowd density option being set to low certainly helps our CPU out, because the more going on screen, well, the more dips and drops we get. But honestly, it's not the worst Cyberpunk experience that I've ever had. So I'm pretty grateful for that. It's playable to an extent. Long term, I'm not sure, and during missions things might slow down a bit, but just exploring the city here, causing chaos, and it really wasn't horrific, so that's always a bonus. Elden Ring is capped at 60 frames per second by default, but of course we weren't touching on 60 FPS pretty much ever here. 39 FPS was indeed the average. This is with the low preset, so everything is basically set to its respective lowest. The only thing that wasn't was AA or anti-aliasing, which is set to high here, just to alleviate some of those jagged edges. And here we were seeing 39 FPS as an average, with a 1% low of 27 and a 0.1% low of 14, so a few issues here and there, as you may expect. You may benefit from a 30 FPS cap just to make things feel a little smoother, but honestly, this wasn't too bad. I'm sure the further we advance into the game and the more that goes on screen, this will impact things a lot more, possibly. But from my gameplay experience today, I was able to have a decent enough time with this super cheap and pretty obsolete by some people's standards a gaming combo. Now, I'm not sure we really needed the performance API for Fortnite. I actually set this to DX11 mode, so this is like the legacy performance mode. I think the new performance mode runs with DX12. With 100% res, the view distance set to far, high textures and low meshes, we were seeing 140 FPS. There were still a few dips and drops. I think this was mainly caused by the CPU. It's pretty CPU heavy these days, at least from my experience. 4 cores and 4 threads is okay, and I mean, we're still going to get dips and drops on a more powerful processor, again from my testing, but overall wasn't too bad. I think we could certainly afford to push the settings a little bit higher, or stay away from the performance API altogether. I think 1080p low would have been absolutely fine, and I don't think we could have really made any changes that would stop the performance dips caused by the limited processing power here. So considering the specs we have, I think this was alright. But again, you may benefit from an FPS cap here, 60 FPS perhaps, and things may feel a little smoother. But not bad for the 4-core, 4-thread i5 and the 2GB GTX 960, just 2 gigs of VRAM today, and people say 8 gigs is the minimum you need these days. Next up, we're testing GTA 4. It's a much older game, I know, but it is one that does have a few performance problems on PC, as we all know. I haven't implemented Fusion Fix or DXVK here. We're using the default DX9 mode. With the high settings, the detail slide is set to 20 out of 100, and to be honest, we had a pretty smooth experience here. 88 FPS overall, with the usual frame time issues that you may expect. The 1% low was 48 and the 0.1% low was 30. So honestly, it can surprise me sometimes, GTA, and it's very hard to gauge how well it's going to perform on your system until you try it. But here, the i5 4690 and 962 gig were doing an excellent job, and I have no complaints really. It's always best to be a bit careful with the detail slider settings, as these can heavily impact performance, but again, it's hard to gauge. You just have to try it out for yourselves on certain hardware and see how well it runs. I would recommend Fusion Fix or DXVK though to run the game with Vulkan, just to smooth things out. However, that will be dependent on the hardware that you have. Some systems will benefit from it, and some, well, it may not make any difference, or it may perform worse. It's worth trying out. But as for this combo, well, I'm just glad we can play this absolute classic with a respectable frame rate. And this combo now costs less than what the game would have done at launch. Let's move on to GTA 4's successor, GTA 5. This is the legacy version, so we don't have the enhanced version installed today. I'm sure it would run okay, but you're certainly best off with the legacy game or the original game with hardware like this. I kept the textures at normal for the sake of the VRAM, however everything else was set to high. The detail sliders and advanced settings were also set to max, and we have FXAA for our anti-aliasing solution here. Overall, we saw 74 FPS with a few little hiccups with the frame times, as you can see. That said, the percentiles remained fairly decent with 49 and 41. What I did notice also was a few texture pop-in issues because of the processor. The lack of more cores and threads here did mean that some of the buildings took a while to load in. The textures were just missing, or the buildings were missing altogether, but after about 2 minutes or so, everything appeared, and I didn't experience any more problems after this, because that wouldn't have been very helpful on a mission if we're like chasing another car or something and then a building just appears in front of us. Yeah, it can be quite off-putting, to say the least. Alright, so next up we have Helldivers 2 with the low preset. I enabled the render scale option and set it to quality here. With native resolution we were still getting at least 30 frames per second, but there were a few dips and drops below that. So with the quality render scale, the game doesn't look too different, and we were seeing 51 FPS on average, so it was certainly a lot smoother here. Wouldn't recommend going any higher than the low preset, again because of the VRAM limitation here, but performance was actually okay. As you can see, even when loads of bugs started filling up the screen, the performance held pretty steady, which is good. One of my favourites up next, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. Here we have the low preset. Again, this performed better than I expected. I did enable FSR. This has 3.1. I set this to balanced for 45 FPS. This is certainly more GPU intensive and doesn't require a super powerful CPU in order to run smoothly. As you can see here, the 4 cores and 4 threads of the i5 seem to be fine for the most part, but the 960 hits between sort of 90 and 100% utilization most of the time, and the CPU is hovering around 70%. Even as we make our way towards the forest or the woodland here, the frame rate is still holding up pretty well. And I was expecting a lot more drops below 30 frames per second, which we didn't see. Not bad for a 2GB card. In Left 4 Dead 2 we're using the highest settings, but anti-aliasing was turned off, in this case MSAA, so running without AA here for 193 frames per second, but I expected no less from this game. Pretty easy to run on a wide range of hardware. 193 was the average, the 1% low was 98, and the 0.1% low was 11. Next up we have Overwatch 2, or Overwatch. I couldn't find Overwatch 2. I think Overwatch 2 may have just become Overwatch again, like just rebranded as Overwatch for some reason. But anyway, I thought this would run well because I had a look at the minimum specs and they were pretty low, so I thought this combination shouldn't be a problem. And as you can see here, we're using the high preset with 100% res scale for 80 plus FPS, 81 overall. Even the percentile lows were good, 63 and 50 respectively, with barely any drops below 60 frames per second. You could of course turn the settings down if you want more performance from this, and just to try and alleviate any potential frame rate drops, but I didn't think that was necessary. I thought we pushed this as high as we could go for at least 60 frames per second, and the high preset seemed to be absolutely fine for that. Again, this average was taken from 3 different games. For the original Red Dead Redemption, I'm using the high preset here with FSR 3 native because it looks a lot better than FXAA, which is also an option of course, and this was fine for at least 60 frames per second, 71 overall, with a 1% low of 53 and a 0.1% low of 32. This still holds up pretty well visually. For a game that came out in 2010 originally on consoles, I think it certainly looks great on PC even now and well worth a play. It'll also run nicely on a wide range of hardware, as you can see here, and even with the lowest settings, I think it still holds up quite well visually. Red Dead Redemption 2, on the other hand, obviously doesn't run as well, and I expected as much. We have the lowest settings with the geometry level of detail set to max, the grass level of detail set to 2 out of 10, TAA set to medium, and the resolution scale set to 2/3, which gave us 56 frames per second on average, which was quite a surprising result. However, when we tried to run at native resolution, yeah, it wasn't nearly half as good as this. There were certainly a few more performance problems. I did start by enabling FSR 2, but that doesn't seem to make much of a difference in this game, so we were best enabling the resolution scale here instead. I also had to set the resolution to 1080p manually from within the settings file in my documents because we couldn't do this in the game. Obviously there's a 2GB card, there is a limitation in place. We could override this in GTA if we need to, but in Red Dead Redemption 2 we can't do this, so we have to adjust the settings from within the game system file. Next up we have Skyrim Special Edition. I'm using the Special Edition here instead of the original release because this version will still run absolutely fine. I'm using the medium settings for this one. This has a 60 FPS cap enabled by default, which I didn't disable because I think it can cause a few issues with the physics. That said, this system had no problems with hitting this cap. 60 was the average, and when we look at the percentile lows of 59 and 54, we can see that there are no real problems. So I think we could have got away with high settings here for sure, but I played it a little bit safe with medium, and if you want to play Skyrim on a rig like this, you should have no issues in doing so. I played this for about half an hour, just exploring outside of towns, inside towns, and the frame rate held pretty steady throughout my gameplay session. We will end on The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. This is the DX11 version of the game, so I'm not running the sort of next-gen update here. Now, this has always been pretty problematic when it comes to CPU utilization within cities, busier areas. We will see some pretty hefty performance drops, but outside of these areas, things certainly do pick up, and overall, it wasn't that bad, but I think we certainly could benefit from hyper-threading here, so perhaps an i7 would certainly smooth things out a little more. That being said, with the medium settings, SSAO and FXAA enabled, the performance wasn't too horrible, though those percentile lows do of course leave a little to be desired. Overall then, the i5 4690 and 2GB GTX 960 is not a combination I'd necessarily recommend, of course, in 2026, but I thought we'd just see how these parts did. I had them lying around, so I thought we'd put them together, see how well they ran a few games, and because I wasn't expecting much at all, I have been pleasantly surprised by the outcome and the performance of these two parts. But let me know your thoughts down below. If you are looking at 960s in 2026, then the 4GB version is worth considering instead, probably not going to cost you much more, and when it comes to i5s of the 4th generation from Intel, you're probably best off looking at i7s because again, they probably aren't going to cost you that much more, and the hyper-threading will really help you out, as you probably saw in my 4790K video. But as always, thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so and you want to, of course, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.